today. In this episode, we're unpacking the benefits of understanding the brain and how to use neuroscience to navigate life even when things seem chaotic. Now, as I quickly share some housekeeping notes, drop in the chat or comments where you're joining in from today. We are recording today's session, so if you're interested in a replay, be on the lookout for an email later today. That email is going to include a survey for feedback, as well as a number of resources that are aligned with today's conversation. We suggest putting your phone on Do Not Disturb, quitting out of your email and messaging apps, so you can really get the most out of today's show. It's also going to help with your audio and video quality. And lastly, we love interaction, so feel free to share your thoughts and comments with us in the chat. Now, to get this show underway, I'm going to introduce our speakers. Our guest for today is a director of research at the Neuroleadership Institute, where she focuses on translating cognitive and social neuroscience into actionable solutions for organizations, as well as helps to communicate relevant research in an accessible manner for the public. Previously, she was a professor at Dominican College and New York University, and a researcher at the Nathan Kline Institute. She holds a bachelor's degree from Brown University and a PhD in neuroscience from New York University. A warm welcome to the Director of Research at NLI, Dr. Emma Saro. Thanks for being here today, Emma.
Hi, Shelby. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And joining her is no stranger, an Aussie turned New Yorker who coined the term neuroleadership when he co-founded NLI over 2 decades ago. With a professional doctorate, 4 successful books under his name, and a multitude of bylines ranging from the Harvard Business Review to the New York Times and many more, a warm welcome to the co-founder and CEO of the Neuroleadership Institute, Dr. David Rock. David, it's great to have you here, and I am passing it over to you.
Thanks, Shelby. Happy Friday. I'm going to hand it over to Emma, actually.
Yeah, nice to be here with you again, David. So we kind of have a special episode today where we're going to get to, probe David's mind about all things important about the brain. It's an incredible organ. It's so complex. Researchers still have so much to learn about it. It's kind of like an open frontier for research. None of us have enough time to really study the brain. So what we're going to talk about today is really what's needed to help us in our everyday life. How much do we really need to know, and why is it important to have an interest and know a little bit about it? And I know, David, you've been bringing the understanding of the brain to us for a while, helping us use it in our everyday life. So I'd love to just kick it off with, how did you start with your interest in the brain? Where did it come from? What were those early insights?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Good to be here with you. It was very, very early. I always had a fascination with how things worked and wanted to take things apart. If you looked at around my bedroom as a kid, you'd see broken down radios and televisions and stereos and speakers. And I was taking everything apart, which quite annoyed my parents because sometimes they were quite good things. And I couldn't always put them back together. But I really wanted to understand how things worked. And at some point, very early, like 14, 15 years old, I noticed I had a brain and that it was spitting out all these crazy things into my head. And I'm like, that's weird. What's that thing? And I started really early doing mindfulness practice. I kind of went on a journey of trying to understand, as a mid-teenager, understand what this was. I read really widely around consciousness and also around physics. I was very passionate about science from an early age, kind of quantum mechanics of the brain and also all sorts of things. And I found myself fascinated by observing in real time what was happening and just having some kind of loose frames, but no neuroscience at the time. But it's been quite a few years from a very young age practicing mindfulness and just kind of observing my own experience moment to moment. And it sort of just it was just kind of really obvious. I wanted to understand what that was. At some point, I was like, I really want to understand that. And I started reading really widely and studying privately. So I studied more formally later, but early on, it was just reading an incredible amount of books and papers and kind of trying to understand it. And it wasn't until 2003, it's just 20 years ago now, 21 years ago, that I kind of really started to study it formally, where I was actually teaching a coaching program, and we had little snippets here and there of kind of brain stuff, but we started to include a lot more about the neuroscience of coaching itself in this at the time NYU program I'd built. And what I found was that explaining things from a physiological perspective just created much deeper insights for people. And just made people much more aware of themselves and aware of others, like moment to moment. Like it just made people more like intelligent and kind of wise, as you might say, or reflective, thoughtful, smarter, all sorts of things. But it was sort of building this language to understand what was going on kind of moment to moment. It was helping. So independent of sort of, selling tickets to anything or marketing benefits, like it was just putting the brain into leadership and coaching programs literally made them much more effective programs. And at that point I was kind of hooked and started a whole, journey. And that was kind of started about 2003. The Institute was launched in 2008. We published the first journal in 2008. And then we've been, passionately studying, all this ever since.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I'm coming from slightly a different place. I've been doing research for a while, a totally different area, and answering really tiny questions about the way the neurons work and things like that. And I never really thought about how you can bring that kind of those questions to the workplace. And I think it's amazing how you're able to kind of synthesize all of this years and years of research and put it in place in everyday life. So like all of these little things that just understanding it can make you a better person individually and then work with others better as well.
I mean, what was happening is I get very annoyed by noisy information. Like I see a noisy pattern, I need to clean it up. And I just at the time, this is like early 2000s, I was reading all these papers and seeing these incredibly consistent themes coming up between like dozens of different labs all around the world. But no one like finding the pattern and saying, well, what does this mean for getting up in the morning, having a good day? What does this mean for dealing with conflict with a friend? What does this mean for trying to have a creative idea? Like practically, and there was just none of the labs would it was almost like against their religion to anchor down on any specific thing you should do. And while it is true, you don't want to be too prescriptive, there's a middle ground of sort of synthesizing the research and then saying, look, we pretty confidently know that you should do things that make your brain quiet if you want to have more insights, for example. Like it's like we can see that action from like 6 different angles from completely different spheres of research, that all of them point to this idea that insights are quiet signals coming into the brain. So yes, there is something you can do, and then that translates into all sorts of habits that you can take. But there's a lot we don't know, but there's also a lot now we do know, but it's in synthesizing the studies more than like one specific study.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking that. I mean, if you were to look, and this is what a lot of our articles have done, is looking over, hundreds and hundreds of studies, you start to see the pattern when you look at enough of them. And there are variability, and the brain is incredibly complex, and there are things that we don't know. But in general, we are able to make like these strong statements about how you can act and impact others and get the best ideas and solve problems and make better decisions. All of these things are coming from all of this great work, but applying it to the workplace, you can actually change behavior across the organization in a way that actually becomes more productive and becomes more collaborative. So I guess, I mean, what are the things that are coming up for you that are, we titled this the unexpected, like the things that are like not really like top of mind. Like, what are those things that are coming for you that like really make your day-to-day better?
I mean, me personally,
Yeah.
I think I've got more, they talk about, in certain people, the Inuit people having, 200 words for snow. I don't know if that's a metaphor or a falsehood, but you do, it's ski season right now. And there definitely, if you're a skier or snowboarder, there really are, dozens of different kinds of snow. If you've ever heard the expression dust on crust, if you're a snow person, you'll know that's just not a fun day to go out. It's really different to, like the day before, which is different to the day before. And in a similar way, there's all this granularity as you get closer to the brain. And what it involves is language that helps you create a schema that kind of describes what's going on. Like, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? How do you interact with this thing? If it's dust on crust, you just like interact a certain way. And in a similar way, as you have more and more language for a mental experience, it's like like where to focus your attention. And that's largely the sort of power that we have, is where do we focus our attention, right? So if you have language for example, the fact that your brain needs to go into kind of idle mode to have a breakthrough idea, right? If you know that and you know what that feeling is as well, you'll be like, oh, I'm stuck. Let me just take a walk, as opposed to I'm stuck, I'm going to have a coffee, right? And so you'll make different choices. But I think it's all about having this broader set of language and sort of having more creative ideas is one. And I've spent a lot of time writing, so I'm often like trying to get that creative idea. But it's much broader than that.
Yeah. And I think with the idea of the language is this idea of if you have a language that many of us can understand. So we often create these like shared languages, right? So SCARF is one of our models that we have a shared language. And when we understand that, we kind of bypass the confusion of trying to understand the other person and understand what they're meaning, is just to go to the strategy and how to act and what's the behavior that you can do to reach the other person, instead of trying to understand where they're coming from first and using all those cognitive resources. So that's one of the ways that we try to, I guess, relate, right, to others. Oh, you're muted. Sorry, David. Oh no, you're muted.
Oh, how did that happen? You don't need to be a scientist or a neuroscientist to like get lots and lots of value. No, there's a sort of sweet spot of kind of how much you would want to know. Like it's not the sort of pop science stuff, most of which is incorrect or incomplete or just wrong. But it's not the like, we use 10% of our brain or this kind of stuff. But it's also not like deep, complex papers that reduce a particular, aspect of how, dopamine is uptaken in a synapse. So there's this sort of middle ground of just understanding the like what's going on moment to moment. And I think it's that sort of, it is a little bit like having a language. I see people who studied our work, use different words because they've got this vocabulary of what's happening. And I think that's sort of that middle ground of sort of just, just the right amount.
Yeah. Well, so let's bring it to a level where maybe people can relate to different scenarios where you've used these different strategies. So you just landed, you have a meeting, you're jet lag. How do you approach this using the brain?
I haven't used that word in some years. I intentionally don't use that word. And this is an interesting one. So I'm originally Australian, and I used to travel to the States and Europe and everywhere for conferences and to kind of start the business here for a long time, for like 10 years. And back then, like it was always economy. It was always like a cheap fare, and I, would always be busy. So I'm like, the first time I flew was disastrous. I was like completely exhausted for like 5-6 days. I'm like, there's got to be a way to, work out the pattern. It took me a few times, but I worked out several things that make flying much, much easier. And I understand that the neuroscience of this. And one of them is basically don't do the math. So there's this interesting thing. If you land somewhere and it's 9 a.m., you'll like feel a certain way. But if you land somewhere it's 9 a.m., but you know that it's 4 a.m. somewhere else, right? You're expecting to feel weird. And what happens is your brain notices all the data about feeling weird that you wouldn't notice if you were just like focusing on being 9 a.m. So if you literally don't know the time where you've come from, your brain can't go, oh, that's why I feel like this, or I should feel like this. And it turns out expectations are really powerful for experience. Like the right dose of expectations is more powerful than morphine. So one of the things is just literally don't work out what time it is elsewhere, which is a little easier when you're, traveling Sydney, New York. A little harder if you're doing, a shorter distance. But that's one thing. The second thing is don't get hungry, because what I found is that low glucose makes the tiredness much worse. And that's the same with all kinds of tiredness, right? The third one is get the right hours of sleep, not a lot of hours of sleep. So you're much, much better to stay up till 2 a.m. the first night you get somewhere local time and sleep till 7, just get 5 hours sleep, but wake up with the light at 7. Right? You're a little off kilter that day, but actually not much at all. And then the next day you're fine. Right. But if you go to sleep when you're exhausted, which is like literally 7 p.m. local time, you'll sleep till 3 a.m. But now you're a wreck. Right. And so it's the right hours, not a lot of hours, is a big thing. Then there's an advanced technique, which is using a very small amount of alcohol, very small, like a few sips early in the evenings, because jet lag is kind of a little bit like being tipsy, and you just can kind of, there you go, I use that word. The travel is like a little like being tipsy. So you can sort of reframe it as just being a tiny bit tipsy Jacques Cousteau called jet lag his drug of choice. And it's sort of like turning it around a bit to be kind of humorous as opposed to being like, oh, I feel weird. It's like, oh, I feel a little like the light's really pretty, everything's kind of nice. Anyway, so those are the main things: is don't do the math, don't get hungry, and get the right hours, not a lot of hours. What I find is you reset. So I taught this to my kids, both kids. We traveled spring and fall for like the first 10 years of their life all around the world, and they still have the skill. They can mostly arrive somewhere, any time zone, anywhere, and have maybe 10% of the issues most people have, not zero. But I find you can get down to about 10% of the issues. And a lot of it is about it's really a lot about your attention and where you're putting your attention.
Yeah, that's amazing. And, Laura asked a question about mindset. And I think you're speaking about mindset, and the mindset that you take on is critical, and it changes how you expect the environment and how you approach the day. So she's working with graduate students, and how is mindset critical to being prepared for a tough conversation, let's say, which an interview would be?
Yeah. Look, the way the brain works is that it's organized around intentions, right? The simplest way to think about this is like you decide you're going to you decide you're going to eat lunch soon, and suddenly you see everything relating to food everywhere, right? You're like, so your brain sets an intention. You want to get healthier. You see running stores everywhere, and you see your friends who are working out and all this stuff. So a lot of the time our intentions are quite unconscious, like I'm just trying not to fail, I'm trying not to look stupid, right? It's our intention. So we're trying not to look stupid in a interview or something. I mean, your brain's going to be focused on the concept of stupid in that case, right? The concept of making mistakes. You're going to be like thinking about mistakes, right? As opposed to let's focus on building a relationship with this person, or let's focus on asking really intelligent questions. Or so a lot of the time we have these sort of negative contexts that the brain is anchored on that are quite often unconscious, and then that's what we get, that's what we see. So it's about consciously, a mindset is like consciously putting an intention into the brain, and then all your unconscious resources start aligning to that. That's kind of the easiest way to think about it. And a growth mindset is like an overall intention that your goal is learning, your goal is like growth, and as opposed to your goal is trying to look good, right? And so you're more likely to like ask questions and experiment with other ideas. You're more likely to sort of be open to feedback, like, because your overall intention is learning, right? Whereas trying to look intelligent or smart. So whatever context you set, your brain will kind of align around that, and it literally just kind of align, and then all the data starts to funnel through that context.
Yeah. That makes me think of all the mantras so I run a lot, and they often tell you to have like a mantra in place when you start to feel tired. And that's the mindset kicking in, telling yourself the same thing over and over again kind of enforces this, like, it's okay, you're going to finish, as opposed to I'm hurting and I just want to stop and this is taking over. I think that kind of speaks to that same idea is, set yourself up for that, for what you want, your goal.
Yeah.
Set the expectations.
Yeah. I know it's a lot about where we focus attention. Where you focus attention like activates processes in the brain. So we don't have a lot of control over our brain at all, but we have a lot of influence. A lot of it's about the little choices you make. Do I focus on this or this? And I worked with Jeffrey Schwartz, who did a lot of the original neuroplasticity research. I worked with him for 3 or 4 years back in the early 2000s, and he helped me. He's sort of one of my main mentors. He wrote The Mind and the Brain and a bunch of other amazing books. And he's a deep scientist on attention and consciousness and all this. And one of the things he explained to me was really, really helpful is we can't control what the impulses and kind of urges and thoughts and desires and everything that come out of the brain into conscious awareness. You can't actually control that, but so you don't have, in a sense, you don't have a lot of free will as to what will come into your brain, right? Like, oh, I want to eat McDonald's today. Sorry to put that out to you all, but like, you can't stop yourself thinking that, right? But you have this moment of, and it's a very short moment, about a third of a second. You have a very short moment between kind of noticing the impulse and acting on the impulse. And if you're paying more attention to those moments, you notice that moment of choice. Oh, I can do that, or I can do this. And so the more language you have for all these different experiences, right, the more you'll notice. Just like if you're cooking, how salt is different to spice to chili, you'll like notice it, right? So similarly, the more language you have, the more moment to moment you can kind of see what's going on in your brain and go, all right, I'll do this, not this. And he called it free won't. We don't have a lot of free will, but we've got this kind of free won't of like, do I go that way or don't I? And I think that's the influence that we have, not control. We have a lot, but we have some influence there. And then the action we take is basically, where do we put our attention?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So what about when, we try to be creative all the time, and sometimes we're more than others. So what happens when you hit that roadblock and you're just stuck? What do you do?
Yeah, so I mean, this is one of the areas I learned about a lot. I was always really fascinated by the creative process and the sort of insight moment. I'm probably one of those insight junkies that's always looking for new ideas and connections. And I love like learning and kind of meeting new people, and have a lot of really diverse kinds of friends and a social life, and so I just like kind of mixing up things a lot and kind of new connections, right? And I've probably got a dopamine receptor that needs more dopamine than some. So there's a D2 receptor issue I probably have. But anyway, the thing that I noticed is, like, I noticed really early how incredibly useful these insights are. Like when you have a breakthrough idea. So, I mean, this was my first area of research back in like 2000, literally about 2003 to 2006. I was studying this and kind of building concepts at NYU when I was on faculty there. And there's a lot of research we can talk about, but just for me personally, like when I notice that I'm failing to solve a problem 2 or 3 times, I just literally give up and come back to it. So constantly like trying something, okay, nothing there, let's come back to it. Take a walk, do something else, sleep on it. Like my unconscious brain keeps working on things. So I do a lot of kind of, it might look like jumping around. It's not really jumping around. I'll just try something, see if there's an insight, and if not, let it sit. And I also, like, when I really hit a wall, I just know to stop pushing and take a walk. Or just go to nature, take a walk for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Just let your brain do the work for you. So I guess I do a lot less pushing, a lot more kind of pausing and seeing if the insights will come.
Yeah. And I think that has to be a bit more intentional now for a lot of us, because a lot of us are remote. It's so easy just to be at your desk constantly. We don't have the commute time always. We don't have the walk between offices always to have those insight moments. But I feel the same way. I think a walk or walking away, you're not using all those resources just to try to solve the problem. It will solve itself. At some point, you'll have an idea that will pop.
Yeah. The other thing I do, and I remember seeing the research on this in one of our early summits, there's amazing research on this, that a nap really improves your ability to have these distant connections. And to have more creative moments. Also kind of resets all your cognitive resources, like you've just had a good sleep. So I learned to nap really early, but like literally if I can be in a 10-minute taxi ride and I can have a 5-minute sleep in that time and wake up refreshed. So I took a lot of practice, but I've been known to nap on boardroom floors in big famous companies, just like ask for the room for 30 minutes and lay down under the table. And like I've done it a lot. And for me, the nap is a really, really, really powerful reset. I'll tend to meditate first for about like 10 minutes and then drift into sleep. I have the combination really good. So really, a really good reset. And the time to do it is the time where you just really feel like you need a nap. Like it could be 2 o'clock, could be 3 o'clock, could be 4 o'clock. Sometimes I'll do it as late as 6 o'clock, but no more than 20 minutes. Set an alarm, always set an alarm. No more than 20 minutes, get into the practice. It's one of the best things for insight and overall cognitive performance. I would do that, 4 to 6 days a week easily.
Yeah, no, that's great. So that brings me to my next thought is, besides, hitting a wall, what are the things that kind of energize you and get ready to focus? Like we talk about focus time, like what gets you ready to focus?
I had, I've talked about this before, but maybe folks haven't heard it, but I'm always trying to hack my brain to like get the most from it, right? And I definitely got a lot of value from understanding the dopamine adrenaline axis. So basically, to focus really well, you need pretty large amounts of dopamine, which is about interest in something. Like something's interesting, that's dopamine. You're interested in a person, you've got this like desire, right? You're interested in an idea, it seems novel, it's a similar mechanism. So dopamine, you need quite a bit of dopamine, but you also need quite a bit of norepinephrine or noradrenaline. It's brain adrenaline. It's basically alertness, right? But you need a decent amount of alertness and a pretty good amount of dopamine. But if you have too much alertness, that's like too much coffee, right? And if you have too much dopamine, that's like a conference with 1,000 people and you're overwhelmed with new ideas, right? So there's this sweet spot. So I spent a lot of time just trying to like work out how to get into that sweet spot. And for my own brain, and yours is going to be different, for my own brain, how long could I focus before that really started to diminish? And it's like an hour or two, depending on the task. But after an hour or two of really intense focus, I need to like re-energize. Now, usually what you need to re-energize is the dopamine. Like the adrenaline's pretty easy to re-energize. That's just like imagine something going wrong. Imagine missing a deadline. Imagine messing up the project you're doing, right? You get the adrenaline. The dopamine's harder. Like that's novelty, it's interest. So how do you keep it? So one of the things is I was for a long time pre-COVID traveling a ton. I'm traveling a bit again now. And a long flight, if you've got space to work, is a fantastic time to be productive. But what I'd find is I'd be productive for an hour and then I'd watch a movie. And then after the movie, I couldn't do anything. And I realized the movies were all raising my cortisol, which is a sort of cheap shot, the anxiety of a movie. And it was making me exhausted. And so when I realized I needed more novelty, so I just started watching like snippets of stand-up comedy, right? So I'd work for an hour or two on a long flight. And for me, a long flight's like 12 hours, 18 hours. I love that. Like the 18-hour flight is amazing for me. But I'll do like an hour or two of real focus and then watch stand-up comedy for 15 minutes and then an hour or two. And then it's time for a meal, right? And I'll again watch some stand-up during a meal and then an hour or two. And then, and so I found I could work for like 12, 15 hours really productively by kind of surfing that dopamine, norepinephrine thing. So I think that's another piece of granular language of like, oh, okay, everything seems really uninteresting. I'm exhausted. All right, talk to an interesting friend, watch an interesting video, do something novel and unexpected, or do something that you just don't think you ever have time to do, but you're interested in. And so that's what I find. So it's understanding the dopamine kind of cortisol relationship and your brain, and kind of managing your environment. That's what I find I can do to really manage focus. The other thing, there's some obvious things, but if you have to turn off, if you have to keep dealing with distractions, the game is up. So I'm on airplane mode a lot. The research is you're really losing IQ if you can even see your phone. It's actually affecting your IQ if you can even see your phone, even if it's off. To have no effect on your cognitive resources, your phone needs to be off or airplane mode and out of sight. So really leaving it out of the way. And it's just because you look at your phone, it's activating all the things that could be coming in right now, which is a lot, right? It's activating the trades you're in the middle of, the social things you're planning, the travel things you're planning, like all of it's there. You look at it, it animates the entire network for organizing everything. And suddenly your brain's noisy. So the other thing I'll just say finally on this is for me, and this is different for everyone, but most people do their best focus in the mornings. Not very completely first up, like maybe 15 minutes in, half an hour in, maybe you have a shower first, maybe you have a light breakfast, but don't look at your phone or computer, or download anything. Like don't look at the internet, right? So you get by far the best focus if you use the mornings and you haven't done all that noisy stuff yet. So you save your brain for what I call level 3 work, which is like writing stuff and building things. Level 2 is like scheduling, and level 1 is like deleting emails and just general emailing, right? So it's sort of like we tend to sort of start work, do all the level 1 stuff, then do all the level 2 stuff, and then whatever's left we do for the deeper work. And I actually think you got to do the deeper work. Well, I know you've got to do the deeper work first. So when I know I need to be productive and I know I need to output, I'll definitely get up, have a snack, and start when my brain is quietest, and that tends to work best.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I was actually just speaking with Shelby before this started about our morning routine of working out before we start. And I notice a clear difference. If I don't get a workout in, if I don't go for a run and I just start working, I'm irritable, I can't focus. Those first few hours are critical. So I think it's so important to find that routine that works for you, because like you said, we're all different. What what we can focus on, the novelty, the difference between the dopamine and the adrenaline, all of that is based on our own individual differences. So I think it is really important. Another thing that's coming up for me is this, and we often talk about this, the connection between the brain and mindfulness practice. And a lot of us practice it in different ways, different kinds of levels, meditation versus just mindfulness practice. We've talked about them. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, this is a study I've been sort of trying to dream up for literally 20 years since I first started noticing how powerful it is to start to learn about your brain. And I've got this strong hypothesis, and I've written a couple of blogs on this, but I've got this strong hypothesis that kind of being on a journey and slowly learning more and more about your brain has very similar benefits as practicing mindfulness. And let me explain why. And I wanted to do like a controlled study, a placebo-controlled study on this somehow. But when you practice mindfulness, you're basically sitting quietly, and you're so there's lots of different types, but it's kind of the breath focused type. You're just watching internal experiences and then maybe gently labeling them, like, oh, that's just my brain doing this. And then you come back to paying attention in the present openly, right? And then you drift off and you go, oh, I've drifted off, and you come back, right? And you drift off, you come back. What you're doing is you're practicing focusing attention, and you're practicing metacognition of where is your attention, and you're practicing switching your attention, right? So focusing, observing, switching. Turns out there's some really important networks in the brain that do these things, but those three mechanisms are the stuff of life. Like that's kind of everything. How well do I focus? How well do I notice what I'm focusing on? And how well do I choose the right path? And so you see benefits from that kind of regular practice around, overall well-being and stress responses and baseline cortisol level and all sorts of things, right? And there's like hundreds and hundreds of studies on the benefits of that. Well, we think that the more you understand about your brain, you're actually getting this similar kind of thing. You're focusing your attention, you're noticing like what's going on in your brain, you're labeling it, you're observing it, and you're making a decision, you're switching, right? So getting in and learning about your brain, particularly if you do it over time, we think is going to have really similar benefits to mindfulness practices. You're going to have all this content that you'll start watching and labeling and shifting. Right. So you see what I mean? It's very, very similar from a sort of mechanism perspective. And maybe my team can find a piece. I wrote on that a long time ago, but there's just, we think that learning about your brain has very similar benefits to mindfulness training or mindfulness practice over time, especially as you develop language and you just naturally spend quite a few minutes every day going, oh, what's my brain doing? Oh, it's doing that. Okay, no, I want it to do this. So it's really woven into everyday life in that way.
Yeah. And you probably get better over time. The more you practice, the better you're able to. Do you find that you're better able to focus on someone that you're talking to, connect with the person that you're talking to? Because as you said, we're distracted by everything, especially now. We've got screens everywhere. Things are popping up, our phones next to us, thinking about what we're going to do after work, and you're trying to focus on someone. And do you find that your attention can just like really hone in on that person better?
I mean, I guess I learned like how to very quickly switch off the noise and get present. We call it a mindful moment. You can be in the midst of total chaos, and you've got this like this skill of kind of taking a breath, really bringing your attention to the present. And what it does is it turns the threat networks down. There's this inverse relationship between threat networks and focusing on data in the present, right? Which you can think of as a kind of mindfulness. So if you focus all your attention in the present on like the feeling of your breath or a smell or a taste, it actually turns down what's called the narrative network, all the stories and all the threat response. So definitely, have this ability in the heat of the moment to kind of get really calm and just there. And, I'll give a talk, I'll be on stage with a big audience or something, and I'll just take a moment before I start to just really be in the moment. And it turns down a lot of noise, and puts me in that kind of more flow zone. I might still have some anxiety, but it's very manageable. It's not the overwhelming threat of level 2 or level 3 threat. It's kind of very manageable in there. So that's what I find. And that also comes from a combination of sort of understanding the theory and then practicing it quite a few times as well.
Right. So yeah, that speaks to, why it's important to understand the brain. We understand why this works so well, and understanding that it will get better and that it actually does allow you to focus on the outside world and not get kind of like overwhelmed by your narrative network and the threat that's associated with it. And we talk all the time about how threat is You know, we're incredibly sensitive to it. We default to it very easily. Which kind of brings me to my next thought is, you know, as a manager, you're dealing with probably more like unexpected changes and different kinds of people and having to interact. So as a manager, what are the things that like the brain can help you with?
Yeah, so like when I wrote Your Brain at Work, which is it's been out for a while now, like I did last year before last, I did like an updated edition. But when I wrote Your Brain at Work, I was sort of picturing this as something for everyone. And what we found like pretty early on is the people who really needed help with understanding their own brain and other people's brains was people managers. Now, I define that as anyone from a frontline all the way to a CEO, but you basically have other folks you're trying to influence, right? You're trying to manage, you're trying to get things done through people. And what I found is that those people had just so many cognitive challenges that they kind of needed the help more. So, if you go from being an individual contributor to manager, you get this like sort of perfect storm of a big jump in how much you have to think about, and therefore how much uncertainty, but also how much uncertainty you have. Like before you knew what you needed to do. Now you're working through 10 people. There's so much uncertainty working through 10 people. So you got this huge jump in how much you've got to think about. That's just massively overwhelming. Now you've got this huge jump in uncertainty, also massively overwhelming. And you're being seen by other people, which is very, very overwhelming to varying degrees for folks. Some people find it slightly energizing, but a lot. Some people it's totally overwhelming. But you're being, a lot more information, a lot more uncertainty, and a lot more people watching you. Even if you're not a new manager, you're experiencing that all the time. But in particularly for someone becoming a manager for the first time, or a more senior manager with a bump in that, what would happen is you get this, your general decision-making resources are strained because of just volume increase, right? So you need help to like increase your capacity somehow. But secondly, your self-regulation resources are strained. You're dealing with higher levels of stress, right? The Peter Principle, which is thought of as, folks being promoted to the level of their incompetence, is probably folks being promoted to the level of their self-regulation ability. Because if you don't have the ability to stay cool under pressure, you will just make terrible decisions and, and fail ultimately. So you've got this big jump in amount of information. So you've got to get more out of your capacity. This big jump in stress response. You need much stronger self-regulation. And you also have like now 10 or 100 or 1,000 or 100,000 people to actually think about. So you need this big jump in your ability to understand others and understand like what motivates them and why they're doing what they're doing. So there are these sort of three areas that are really necessary. And what you see is leaders or managers of all levels kind of fail for one of two main reasons. Either they just sort of get stuck being tactical. They can't think strategically, so they're just always kind of in the doing. And a big part of that is actually the self-regulation challenges. They just can't deal with any more uncertainty. They sort of craving certainty. And the other thing is that they just don't mentalize well about others. They don't imagine other people well, and they don't think about other people well. And again, that's kind of a failure of the social cognition. So self-regulation and social cognition kind of are really challenged as a manager or as a new level of manager, or even just when the world changes. And so what we found is those people really could benefit the most from understanding their own brain and other people's brains.
Yeah. So what are the first, if you're being promoted, new level, you have a whole new set of team members under you, you feel all this pressure, what would you tell them to do first? Like the first 3 steps? Is it like taking care of yourself, or is it thinking about others first?
Yeah, I mean, we had this big debate internally about the right place to start kind of teaching managers. And by the way, when I say managers, this could be an entrepreneur with a team of 2 or 3 people. It could be a corporate person. It could be a creative person who's just managing some assistants. It could be a CEO. It's just like anyone who's sort of trying to get things done through others. I do think that you got to start with managing your own brain and kind of coming back to getting more out of your capacity, having more breakthrough insights. And staying cool under pressure. Like those things are kind of the foundations of good decisions for you, but also your team is really affected very directly very, very directly, your team is affected by your mental state. So if you're optimistic and positive and just a little chirpy and cheery, like that rubs off on them, right? And brings them from anxious to neutral. If you're a little anxious and uptight, that rubs off on them, and their slight anxiety is now worse. So there's this whole thing about your IQ and your team's IQ is very directly driven, or not driven, but influenced by the mental state you have. So you really quickly you start to see that as a people manager, you kind of have this responsibility of taking care of your mental state. Or as Satya Nadella said when I met him from Microsoft early on, like, he said, I don't get to have a bad day. Like when I have a bad day, all of Microsoft has a bad day. So there's this responsibility to learn about your brain and kind of manage yourself really well. I think that the more you can do that through the lens of what's going on in your brain, sort of the easier it is to animate the language in your brain itself. It's very meta, but the more you can kind of think about these issues, like understanding others through the lens of what's happening in their brain, what's happening in your brain, it's just easier. It's less cognitive load for the overwhelmed brain to actually activate, those things.
Yeah, just increasing that self-awareness of what you do and how you impact others too. Yeah. So what about when you just have a really bad day? You wake up, it's a horrible day. What do? Do you show up and push through or walk away?
So I'm laughing because there's a really inappropriate meme that popped up on TikTok. I don't know if you've seen it. It's like, someone trying to ride a motorbike up a hill and the bike just tips over and just goes crashing down a ravine or something. There's a voice, an East Asian voice says, when you have a bad day, I'm not gonna swear, but F it. Just go back home, like, and there is this thing, not that I'm suspicious like that, but there's sometimes things just go awfully wrong, and you'll have what I would call a level 3 threat response, which is essentially the amygdala hijack, or the sort of overwhelm, flip your lid, kind of can't think straight anymore response. And when you have that, you really, really do need to like take a power walk for half an hour to an hour or more, have a sleep, have a meal, like give up for an hour or two. Like we have a really, really tough experience. The cortisol from that streams through your body, and you actually have to get it out before you can focus again. So there is an element of knowing when to like just give up, let your brain rest, and have that nap or do that power walk, and then you'll have energy again. And this is one of the lovely things about the hybrid world, is people can manage more people can manage their mental state more flexibly than if they're in the office all the time. And maybe on the days at the office also there's more flexibility. But I think there's more flexibility from organizations to sort of manage your own work patterns and styles so you can continue to focus.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And just developing strategies that start to work, turning off your camera and walking away if you feel like you're going to impact others. Because in the awareness that when you do have an emotional reaction, that it will impact your team and your team's work at the same time. So what about individual contributors? So they're not managers. I mean, is it different for them?
No, I think it's there's benefits to understanding your brain for everyone. Like everyone can benefit from understanding a bit more. I think just managers are like can benefit even more, because it's kind of the job is tougher. But for an individual contributor with some tough clients and constantly like changing deadlines and trying to understand others, there's a ton of value in understanding what's happening and the limits of cognition. So I think there's a tremendous number of benefits. We've just launched for the first time in 26 years, we've just launched kind of access to our whole suite of research and models and tools to the public in our first ever kind of B2C program with all our research in it. And it's a 6-month experience called LEAD. We've been talking about it for a couple of months now, but it's a 6-month experience of essentially walking you through as a people manager the critical habits, the essential habits, not everything, but the essential habits for like focusing better and managing emotions and staying positive and resilient. Like, so a lot of stuff about yourself, a lot of stuff about how you just really efficiently work with others and then really efficiently work as a team. So it's the foundations of like brain-based management and leadership. And we do think there's an individual contributor version of this that we'll work on in the next few months. But at the moment we haven't done that. But we think that there is a sort of maybe a 3-month program to give you all the foundations of kind of understanding your brain as an individual contributor. But lead is up there and out now. I think we're just literally this week launching our first cohort, and we've just opened our second cohort in March for people to check out. So I think my team's put a link in there.
Yeah. And I think we're going to be live in March too, right? We have a live
Yeah, this has been this fun project because it's stretched our own growth mindset a lot. This project, going massively digital, and we just had this insight. Even though we've built the 6-month digital experience, it might be fun to have a kickoff event in a different city to kind of gather the cohort, meet each other, and then work together. So I'm actually kicking off sometime in March. My team can put the date in Silicon Valley, a kickoff of a lead cohort. That will then work virtually for 6 months, but we're doing an in-person kickoff of that, which is it's kind of an experiment. We're doing a ton of experiments, and I just think and this is what we've sort of tried to weave into lead. Lead is literally 15 minutes a week. It's not very much, but 15 minutes a week of like digesting one specific skill about your brain. So even like being able to focus better, there's one specific skill set around like managing kind of all the logical stuff and how you kind of organize and synthesize things more effectively. So you'll learn that. You practice that for a week, then you'll learn about like insights, practice that for a week. So it's literally this kind of one set of habits a week over this journey, and it's kind of cool. We're super curious to see how this is going to go, but we're literally just kicking off this for the first time now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's great because it provides a very tangible set of strategies, just like we've been talking about today. Like, how do you, let's say, increase your capacity? A few very easy ways to do that as you're working through a problem that anyone can do and build on. So I think that's one of the best parts about this, is that we're talking about very easy, tangible skills that you can leverage your brain to actually work better. And that's exactly we built it.
One of the simplest things, one of the most obvious things people forget, is just like use your brain to process, not store. Like use your working memory to process connections between information, the hierarchy of information, the relationship between information, not to store the information. Like you've got, someone's giving you an idea with 4 or 5 parts. Don't try to like remember the idea. Put the idea on your flip chart, on your wall, on a piece of paper, on a napkin, anything. Just kind of get it out of your head so you can actually use your limited capacity, because we have this limited capacity to actually process the information. How does it connect to existing ideas? How does it connect internally? What's the order? What's the importance? Like everything. So that's a mistake people make. They're tiring their working memory a lot unnecessarily. And I think that's one of the messages of learning about the brain is that actually respecting our capacity limits. There's a great book on self-regulation called Willpower by Roy Baumeister, and he talks about David Blaine, the sort of famous English performer who would do these incredible feats of self-regulation, it seemed like. And what he said was if he needed self-regulation, the game was up. He set up systems so he didn't need to rely on willpower. That willpower is like the last resort. Willpower is very, very limited. And so that's an example there.
Yeah, that's awesome. So if we were, we're almost coming up at close, what would you say are like the things that inspire you the most about the brain, understanding the brain, and what you've used it for?
I mean, I think, personally, the most fascinating stuff is everything about insight and the creative process. And I continue to be fascinated in all the research coming out on that. And I think that's really, really interesting. I think that we're starting to see more and more information about the negative effects of, social media and, multimedia use. And I think that we're going to get to a time of kind of a lot more kind of controls over some of that. There's some really destroyed young brains out there. So I think that's important research. For me, I think the thing is to constantly be learning about it. Going back to the mindfulness question, for me, the thing is like, how do you keep learning about it so you're continuing to kind of pay attention to new things happening in your brain, or maybe being reminded, if you're not learning new stuff, you're kind of bringing your attention back to things. And so I think, for me, I'm always interested in kind of what's a new area. And if I'm not learning about the brain, I'm learning generally, which means I'm learning about myself and I'm kind of applying this. So I constantly like to be doing quite difficult things and challenging myself. And I think as you do that, you're literally building the muscles that you need most.
Yeah. Well, it's a complete embodiment of growth mindset there, and it works.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's a lot, when you look up the word leadership, on Amazon, I don't know, you look it up today, I don't know what the number is. The last time I looked, there was like 1.5 million books, with the word leadership in the title. Management is just literally millions and millions of books. And you have to think about, like, what does that mean? What does it mean that there's all these different books, and not to get get myself like destroyed in the world, but same with religions. There are lots and lots and lots of religions, right?
Yeah.
And in both cases, people are describing very similar phenomena and trying to put solutions to very, very, very similar phenomena. So I was always interested in what are the phenomena that all these different leadership books are trying to address, right? And I give an example. There's one just absolutely consistent thing. It's just people are not you, right? People have really different brains to you, and the more you have to think about, the harder it is to remember that, and you'll just do what you need. But as a leader, like really, really being able to imagine someone else has a completely different brain to you, understand that brain a bit, and adapt rather than be automatic, even in the heat of the moment. Like that's a common theme through just about every leadership, program. Being big, like lifting people up to big picture, such a, and out of the details, such a common theme across all leadership books. So that's kind of what, kicked off this journey, like 20 something years ago, getting passionate about the science is like, I want to build better leaders, but I don't want to write another leadership book. I want to understand what's inside a million leadership books that kind of drives all of it. And I think that's been a fascinating journey. And I think the more you sort of get to that source code, the more you've got this rich lexicon of language to adapt better moment to moment.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I think, one reflection of why there are so many leadership books is everyone's trying to figure it out, the best way to do it. It's hard. And I think, using the tool of the brain is one great way to like leveraging that to get the best out of people, because it is complex. And so one question I have, and this is just a little bit as an aside, is when we think about the development of AI and how, AI is trying to understand the brain and work the way the brain does. I mean, any thoughts on that and like where we're going to go with that?
It's so fascinating. It's so fascinating. I've been thinking about this for a long time. The thing to note about AI is I don't think like where we are now is all that interesting, but where we'll be in like a couple of years is going to be really, really profound. And the breakthrough is actually in the interface between humans and machines. That's where we're going to see huge breakthroughs. And if you think about computers, all the huge breakthroughs in computers have been an interface breakthrough, like going from sort of everyone having to use basic language to being able to use a mouse on a screen called WYSIWYG. That was like a giant leap in the number of people using computers and the number of uses for computers. Right? Like suddenly it was a 10x breakthrough in both uses and number. And when we went from the computer screen to a touch screen, similar, it was a huge jump in the number of uses, right? The phones are now used for everything. It's not really hardly anything you don't use your phone for. And so in a similar way, when we go from touch screen to conversations or moving in space, as we're starting to do with the Apple videos, the goals, right? You're going to this, it's a huge interface breakthrough. And I think we're going to see as big changes as sort of pre-internet to like now, like, but in like within 5 years, as opposed to within 20 years. Yeah. So it's going to be really, really interesting. But what you've got to remember is that the human brain is the bottleneck. And so you're interfacing with a machine, you're interfacing with this very limited capacity called our working memory, which doesn't like new things. So the sort of, the brakes on AI is largely human intelligence. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that kind of all unfolds. But there's definitely some skills. There's definitely some skills for people to learn to kind of engage with AI. And interestingly, one short story in this, we had this amazing interview with a professor who built a black box recorder for operating rooms. And what he said was like gathering 1 million data points a day now is relatively easy, for each site. Finding the insights in them is a lot harder. You actually got to understand human experience and behavioral science and neuroscience to actually find some kind of insight in all the noise. Like you can see a million data points about people moving around a room, but what does it mean? So you actually need to understand the human brain to find the insights. And then the even harder thing is getting people to change based on those insights. And then you really need to understand the brain. So I think with AI, we actually ironically need more awareness of our humanity and our human capacity to learn, to change, to grow, to connect. We actually need more and more about that in order to leverage the best of AI as we kind of get into that interface breakthrough. So I think we're going to see more and more people focused on the human side of intelligence in parallel.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll force us to be better at making decisions, really figuring out the right way to make decisions, what data to use, how to ask the right questions of AI too.
Yeah. It's going to be really interesting. Hey, just before we jump off, I know my team's got a poll probably, but just before folks start jumping off, if you're interested in LEAD, if you're from an organization and you're interested in kind of looking at LEAD, because LEAD is the first like completely scalable, really transformational leadership experience that we believe is going to be more effective than putting people in person, but we're doing it, completely digitally. If you're interested in LEAD, just put your company name and the word LEAD in the chat, and someone will follow up with you. I think they'll put up a poll as well. We'll just put LEAD and your company name, and someone will follow up. And then there's a link my team can put into the actual open enrollment version as well. So there's an in-house program and there's an open enrollment. But you can answer the poll that's there put up, or you can put something in the chat. And either way, we'll get back to you. But just in closing, Emma, we'll let people get back to it. In closing, I think the theme here is that the more language you have for what your brain's doing moment to moment, the more adaptive you can be, the more of this free won't that you can exhibit, the more you can kind of see what's going on in real time. A bit like Neo in the Matrix, suddenly seeing all the data, right?
Yeah.
Suddenly know what's going on. And I think this is even more important as a people manager, to have this language, even more important as a people manager. So yeah, folks, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Hopefully this has been useful. Definitely at the very least, when you travel long distance, try those things. Don't do the math, don't get hungry, and get the right hours, not a lot of hours. Super helpful for me, and seems to work for my kids. So maybe it's universal. But Emma, thanks for your great questions and conversation today. And Shelby behind the scenes for everything.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Emma and David. I definitely need to put some of those things into practice. We appreciate you being here, and the poll has already been up, but just as David said before, if you enjoyed this episode, you will really love LEAD. So registration is already open for our next cohort, and you can also join us in person for that kickoff event in San Francisco on March 20th. So our team already provided the links, but if you need more information, you can also visit our website. And also, if you enjoyed today's podcast or today's episode, then you should definitely check out our podcast, Your Brain at Work. We have episodes from the past, solo episodes, and a lot there to share. So on behalf of our team behind the scenes, thank you for being here as always, and we will see you again next Friday.